Welcome, everyone, to Fantasy Foresight, the podcast. We're your hosts and co-founders of FantasyForesight.com, coming to you from the Rambo Fixture Company studios. I'm Ben.
And I'm Jay.
You ready to get rolling, Jay?
You know it. Let's do this.
All right, let's go. Welcome in, everyone. It is Saturday, July 27th. We are back for part 2 of our doubleheader, and we are now covering the NFC North wide receivers and tight ends. How you doing this morning, Jay?
Ben, I am doing great. I'm ready to get after it. Again, we are covering the talent-rich NFC North. I can't wait to dig in. Steve, how are you doing?
I am doing still fantastic in this part 2 of our doubleheader, and I have not only had a canteen of black iced coffee, I've had 2 canteens now. I'm pretty amped up. I'm ready to roll.
We're all wired. Ben is double fisting his coffee. I'm 10 cups into my coffee. Let's get after it, fellas.
First up, we've got an electric tight end out of Detroit, rookie tight end TJ Hawkinson. He is currently going as tight end 12 in the top end of the 11th round behind David Njoku and Austin Hooper, and in front of Delaney Walker and Greg Olsen. This guy's a rookie. We don't have a lot of information on him just yet. He is uber talented. I mean, just yesterday on ESPN.com, Michael Rothstein was speaking to some of his early observations on TJ in camp so far. He said, quote, Hawkinson worked his way into the end zone. Backup quarterback Tom Savage let the ball go. Hawkinson was in the middle of traffic, though. He had to jump, and he outplayed fellow rookie Will Harris coming down with a touchdown. Over and over again, early in Lions training camp, it's been like this. Double coverage, no problem, end quote.
Look, you love hearing that. Dane Brugler's draft guide, he was his tight end 1 overall coming out of college. You know, everything is rosy right now for Hawk. It seems like the path is paved for him to get starting time early, and he could very well step in and be a fantasy producer. It is much easier for a very high-end talented tight end to come in and have fantasy relevance than the other skill positions, as we have seen, especially wide receiver. So for him to be going at tight end 12, while risky for a rookie, not knowing what he's going to do at this level, going around guys like Delaney Walker and Greg Olsen, I would certainly take a shot on Hawk going into the season.
I could see where you're getting at with that, Jay. For me, you just hear more and more about how much the Lions are going to try to have a massive running game and scale back the passing volume. And you got Marvin Jones coming back supposedly healthy this season. And I love Hawk and the talent, and I think he's definitely going to be a future Pro Bowler. He's going to be a guy that's going to be a tight end of the future in the NFL. But as far as his rookie season, I'm just not too high on him. And I don't know. I like maybe taking a stab at Delaney Walker or Greg Olsen really late in drafts, even though they might not make it past week 3.
And another tight end that's going after TJ Hawkinson I really like in this division is Chicago Bears tight end Trey Burton. He's going as tight end 15 in the middle of the 13th round behind Delaney Walker and Greg Olsen, and in front of Jimmy Graham and Jack Doyle. He's Foresight's aggregate projected tight end 19 in 2019, and he's total Foresight's tight end 17 overall as far as our ranking goes in 2019. He's got the 19th to 32 rated Savage ranking. That's our strength of schedule metric. And all of our ADP information is from fantasyfootballcalculator.com according to 12-team PPR redraft settings. And there was a lot of hype about Trey Burton last year, an overhype. Now, like always, the pendulum has swung too far, and people are completely discounting this guy because he didn't live up to their unrealistic expectations last year. Now, the only thing that gives me a little bit of pause is his offseason sports hernia surgery. But, you know, I mean, again, it's in the offseason. He didn't miss time. He was able to gut through it, play 16 games, still finishes tight end 8 overall, tight end 13 in points per game, tight end 11 in targets with 77, tied for tight end 10 in receptions with 54, tied for tight end 4 in receiving touchdowns with 6 of those. And in his next gen stats, he was wide receiver, running back, tight end 15 in average separation. So the guy is an elite talent, and keep monitoring his health. But as long as he can stay healthy, this is a guy who I think could return an extremely nice ROI at that tight end 15 price this year.
Listen, he's not going in the 14th round, so I'm not going to battle you too much on this, Ben. He's a guy who we talked about last season being touchdown dependent. He did finish in as tight end 4 with 6 touchdowns. So that volume is the only thing that worries me. Can he continue to get that type of volume to sustain his tight end 8 overall level. And if he can, being drafted as tight end 15 is a great value. He's a guy who I didn't think was consistent. Steve, was I right in thinking that after last season?
Well, actually, Jay, so Trey Burton, he finished 3 times in the top 6, which actually clocked him in tied for tight end 9 overall. And then when you look at him as far as how many times he finished as a tight end 1 or better, so a top 12 guy, he actually finished as tight end 5 in that metric. He finished there 7 times. So a little bit more consistent than you probably thought he was. Now, given it was a pretty down year for the position overall, and Burton's one of those guys that, and you guys both spoke to it a little bit, the touchdowns. Are they going to regress? Can they improve? He does seem to have a nose for the end zone. The 6 touchdowns he had definitely helped carry him to his fantasy finish, but he is one of those guys that when you look at the guys he's going around and his price tag, very intriguing. I feel like his price this year is very attractive. Last year, not so much.
Steve, to your point, he was much more consistent than I ever would have guessed, but when I look at his playoff performances last season, going in as tight end 31, then tight end 3, then tight end 17, I guess, like we always have, is recency bias, and that's what's stuck in my mind.
So as long as he can stay healthy, I think he's going to return a great value at that price tag. And now, I really like his 2 other counterparts remaining at the position in this division as well. We move on to Green Bay Packers tight end Jimmy Graham. He's going as tight end 16 right behind Trey Burton in the middle of the 13th in front of Jack Doyle and Kyle Rudolph. He is total foresight's tight end 11 this year, ladies and gentlemen. His aggregate projection is better than his ADP as well as tight end 14. And he's got a top 11 Savage strength of schedule ranking at the position this year as well. And let's just walk through his career tight end finishes, okay? Last season, everybody thinks he had a terrible year.
Yes.
He was still a tight end 1, tight end 12 overall. Year before that, he was tight end 6, then tight end 4, then tight end 20, tight end 2, tight end 1, tight end 1, tight end 2. He played all 16 games last season, gutted through a ton of injuries, which is why even though they brought in some new young prospects, they still committed to him by paying him a $5 million roster bonus on March 15th. So they brought in Mercedes Lewis to be the blocking specialist. Jimmy Graham is still the primary pass catcher in this offense. He gained a lot of trust and respect from A-Rod's last season. And this is the year of Jimmy Graham's renaissance, ladies and gentlemen. You want to talk about value, going pretty much for free as a tight end 16, a healthy Jimmy Graham and A-Rod's improved offense is going to be a potential league winner.
And then let's not talk about an offense devoid really of elite wide receiver talent outside of Devontae Adams. They have a lot of young, unproven receivers, and they are going to need some veteran presence in that pass-catching offense. And Jimmy Graham, a healthy Jimmy Graham, could be exactly that.
And you know what, guys? Again, I have to preface this with saying it was a pretty down year for the tight end position last year. But that being said, Jimmy Graham overall, consistency-wise, still was the tight end 12 overall in fantasy football last year when you look at his average weekly ranking. And yeah, for a guy that's going absolutely free, I mean, okay, Jimmy Graham had 2 touchdowns last year. That's the lowest total of his career, like, period. The guy is a red zone stud. Aaron Rodgers in his career, like healthy as a starter, had his lowest touchdown total of 25. You have to think if A-Rod bounces up into that mid 30s, low 40s touchdown total, Jimmy Graham, he will inevitably have 3-4 times as many touchdowns. And when you look at the tight end position, that is a position that outside of the top 3-4 guys, it's pretty much a touchdown dependent kind of a position. So sign me up all day long for a free Jimmy Graham at the end of my draft. I mean, you get him for free, guys. Love it.
We get to the end of this analysis, and I see tight end 12 in consistency, tight end 12 in a season where he was injured during the year and gutted it out. Total Foresight has him ranked as tight end 11 heading into 2019, and he has a tight end 16 price tag. You're paying below his floor. It's fantastic.
Value all day. Like I said, at a very limited upside position, that could be a guy that helps you win your league this year. No. Just like our next tight end, Minnesota Vikings tight end, Kyle Rudolph. again, somebody else that I do not understand why everybody is completely writing him off. He's going as tight end 18 at the back end of the 13th behind Jimmy Graham and Jack Doyle in front of Mark Andrews and Jordan Reed. He is the aggregate projected tight end 17, but Total Foresight likes him as tight end 9. He has a middle of the road savage strength of schedule ranking at the position. And let's just walk through his career finishes, shall we? Tight end 7. Tight end 8, tight end 2, tight end 15. That's just the last 4 seasons. Before that, he had some injuries and a tight end 11 finish in there as well. But last year, he played all 16 games, tight end 7 overall, tight end 12 in points per game. Again, perceived to have a very down year. Still finished as tight end 10 with 81 targets, tight end 7 with 64 receptions, tight end 10 with 634 yards, and tied for tight end 9 with 4 touchdowns. I mean, Kyle Rudolph still has it at this position. And I know they brought in Irv Smith, but he has some very limited route running capabilities. And again, I expect this offense to take another step forward this season. I think Kyle Rudolph's going to benefit from that. And I think that's vetted out in his next gen stats and his consistency metrics.
Just because the team wasn't sure they were going to bring Kyle Rudolph back all of a sudden means his career must be over. That's the narrative going on this offseason. He was a guy who was wide receiver, running back, or tight end 7 overall in average separation. And he averaged 5 targets a game. That's it. That's a safe amount for Kyle Rudolph to continue to be a dominant tight end. And you spoke to it, Ben. Irv Smith ain't there yet.
Nope.
Okay? It's still Kyle Rudolph's show in Minnesota in a dynamic offense that will continue to put up fantasy points, value.
And yeah, from a consistency standpoint, guys, so Kyle Rudolph clocked in with top 6 performances at the position. He did that twice, which tied him for tight end 11. When it came to finishing as a tight end 1, he did that 5 times, tied him for tight end 10. And then his overall average weekly ranking, he was the 8th most consistent tight end, which heading into this podcast, doing my research, I really wanted to dog on Kyle Rudolph, but as I read that, it makes it a little bit more difficult to do. And you guys make some good points about the addition of Irv Smith. I will say the only thing I do want to point out, Rudolph might have finished as tight end 7 overall in fantasy, but if you look at him up until the final week of the season, because he went off in the championship round for teams last year, he was tight end 14 in a very down year for the tight end position. So there's certainly value there. He's a guy that if you are going to punt on the tight end position, which I know I certainly am in pretty much every league I play in, he's a guy that if he's there kicking around at the end of your draft, why not go with a tried and true name, a guy that Kirk Cousins probably in a second year, having that relationship built with Kyle Rudolph, probably going to target him in the red zone. And again, when you're talking about tight ends that late, it's all about the touchdown upside week to week, because you're going to be, if you're streaming tight ends, it's all about the touchdowns week to week.
And a safe floor. Tight end 18, I'm insulted. Let's move on.
Yes, sir. We have got a plethora of elite wide receivers in this division, starting off with Green Bay Packers wide receiver Devontae Adams. He is currently going as wide receiver 2 behind only DeAndre Hopkins at the 107 spot in front of Michael Thomas, Julio Jones, and Odell Beckham Jr. He is both Foresight's aggregate projected and Total Foresight's overall wide receiver 2. He has a 12th ranked Savage strength of schedule metric at the wide receiver position. And over the last 3 seasons, this guy has been a stud. Wide receiver 2, wide receiver 14, and wide receiver 9. He played 15 of 16 games last season, was wide receiver 1 overall in fantasy points per game, 169 targets, 1,100 receptions, 1,386 yards, 12.5 yards per reception, and 13 touchdowns. Top 12 in every single one of those metrics, and top 5, 1, and 2 in a lot of them as well. This guy is an absolute stud. I have zero concerns about him, and it should be a huge season for him.
And he was a wide receiver, running back, or tight end 7 overall in percentage of targeted air yards on this team, and that should come as no surprise. He is an elite fantasy producer. What we saw last year, we saw numerous times where he was assaulted on the field that would have brought criminal charges in the public, and the guy still toughed through it and played 15 games. He is a warrior, and he has my immense respect. Steve, how was he from a consistency standpoint?
You guys know I love DA, and He was the most consistent wide receiver in fantasy football. He was sensational, guys. When you look at how many times he finished as a top 6 wide receiver, he did that 5 times, tied him for WR2. Times he clocked in as being a WR1 or better, so top 12. He did that 8 times, guys. WR2 tied for that metric. And then when you look at how many times he finished as a WR2 or better, top 24 at the position. And keep in mind, a lot of teams in today's NFL, they usually have 3-4 wide receivers on the field at any given time. This guy did it 14 out of 15 weeks, WR1. And his overall average weekly ranking is stupid. He averaged an 11.7 overall average weekly ranking, which is a WR1. Of course, that was the top guy, most consistent guy in all fantasy football. And then you look at his playoff performances, WR10, WR6, WR6. And again, there are so many wide receivers that get a ton of snaps every single week in the NFL. And this guy, it's just bonkers. My top wide receiver this season in fantasy football. I want to own him everywhere that I possibly can. I value him a lot more than I do probably a lot of running backs.
And we mentioned it before, with a lack of proven talent at the wide receiver position in that Green Bay offense, which we expect to have an even better season than last year. Why not? I cannot argue with it.
It's pretty difficult to be a high value pick at the 107 spot. And I think we all agree that Devontae Adams still fits that bill.
Right.
Next up, we've got an exciting wide receiver core in the Minnesota Vikings. First up, we've got wide receiver Adam Thielen. He is finally getting the respect he deserves in ADP land, going as wide receiver 11 in the top end of the 3rd round behind Mike Evans and Keenan Allen, and in front of T.Y. Hilton and Amari Cooper. He is Foresight's aggregate projected wide receiver 13, but he is total Foresight's wide receiver 8 overall. And I don't disagree. I think he's a stud and a great value this season.
Ben, let me interrupt you right there. I feel like Mr. Thielen's still being disrespected. He's being taken WR11 in drafts. He played 16 games last year, finished WR7 in points per game. He was WR6 in targets, WR3 in receptions, WR8 in receiving yards, and WR9 in receiving touchdowns. And he's still being taken WR11 behind all of those finishes. The man is still being undervalued, and I don't understand it. In addition, he had 33% of his team's targeted air yards, which doesn't worry me at all because our boy Diggs, who we're going to cover next, had 30%. And that's fine because these two guys are the studs on this team, and I don't understand why people aren't taking him. But I love the value, and I'll take him at a discount.
It's just like that Step Brothers gif I just shared with you on Twitter yesterday, Steve, where it's like, good, yeah, more for me and you.
Exactly. That's right. That's right.
And from a consistency standpoint, Steve, I know he lit it up.
Yeah, Thielen was awesome last year.
Preach.
I mean, he, as far as top 6 performances, he did that 7 times.
Yep.
That's WR1. And then when it came to top 12 finishes, he did that 8 times, tied for WR2. Times he was locked and loaded as a WR2 or better, so top 24, did that 12 times. And his overall average weekly ranking came in as the 4th most consistent wide receiver in all fantasy football. Now,
this is why he's being drafted where he is. Go over it, Steve.
Yeah, I was going to say a couple of things real quick. His fantasy playoffs were pretty, by his standards, trashy. I mean, WR27, WR73, WR30. And I do want to point out, and I think this is, well, I don't think, I know this is why he's being discounted right now when it comes to his ADP price, is when you look at Adam Thielen and you split his fantasy season, he was the WR1 in fantasy weeks 1 through 8. But when you look at him the second half of the season, WR19. When you look at him once Dave DiFilippo was exited out of Minnesota and you had Stefanski as the OC and they really committed to the run game. Guys, he was WR42 the last quarter of the season. And so that's, I think, where a little bit of that trepidation comes in. Now, Minnesota was making a playoff push that, last quarter of the season, and it did scale back their passing game, but there's no reason to think that Adam Thielen is going to be, a WR42 moving forward.
No, at the wide receiver 11 price tag, I feel completely comfortable taking him, especially more than the up and down Amari Cooper. So it's, for me, I have no issues with Thielen. I think his ADP is just going to slide more and more as we get closer to a redraft season. And again, I'll be happy to take him at a value price all day because everybody else is going to be primarily focused on his teammate, Minnesota Vikings receiver Stephon Diggs. Jay, I'll let you take it away.
Diggs is my boy too, and he's being undervalued, and I'll take him at a discount all day long. Thanks, everybody. He's currently being selected as WR15 overall behind Amari Cooper and AJ Green, and going ahead of Julian Edelman and Brandon Cooks. His aggregate projection is currently WR17. Our total foresight ranking has him as WR11. His career fantasy finishes so far, outside of his rookie year, is WR30, WR19, and WR10 last year, where he played in 15 games and was WR11. He was WR6 in targets, wide receiver 3 in receptions with 102. He was wide receiver 17 with over 1,000 yards last year, and wide receiver 9 with 8 touchdowns. Again, we talked about his percentage of targeted air yards. These two guys are the beasts on this offense. The only thing that limits Diggs are nagging injuries. That is it. When he is free of injury, he is an explosive elite playmaker on offense. The only thing that slows him down are nagging soft tissue injuries, which is why he lags behind Adam Thielen, both in ADP, in stats, and in my brain.
Yeah, I mean, Adam Thielen's just a more durable receiver, and Adam Thielen has a higher yards per reception average last season than Stephon Diggs did. So I just don't see Adam Thielen going anywhere. I think he is going to be reliable week in and week out, but I like Diggs too, and he's a little bit more risky, so I tend to lean towards Thielen, especially since the hype seems to lead towards Stephon Diggs. But I really like both these guys. I want all of the pass catching activity out of this Minnesota Vikings offense that I can get in 2019.
And the recency bias we discussed with the end of the Vikings season last year, I want to talk about that because I was curious if it had anything to do with game flow. Here was the Vikings schedule the last 3 weeks of last season's fantasy playoff schedule. First, they played the Bengals and won 34-7. There was no need to pass the ball around. Then they shut out the Packers 16-0. Again, no reason to throw the ball around. Then they played the Bears' anemic offense and won 23-10. There was no need for them to throw the ball late because of schedule and game flow. They played teams with weak offenses that they had no problem handling heading into the playoffs.
Jay, you're the only person I've heard say anything like that on this topic. I think that's an outstanding point, and especially early on in the season, I think this offense is going to feast.
Yeah, that's an excellent point you made, Jay, and that's something to keep in mind with all those NFC North teams. Like, there's going to be a scaling back with the weather, and
that's a good point, Steve. Yeah.
Game within the game right there,
yeah,
Steve.
That's a good point,
is
Steve.
Like you rely on these guys early on and down the stretch as you get closer to playoff time. And it's such a
bear in mind. Because on paper, guys, wouldn't we agree? Vikings, Packers, you look at their, they play week 2 or 3 early last season. It was a shootout.
Right.
But later in the year, a totally different story, but that's a great point you made, Jay. I love it. Last year, guys, Diggs, he was very consistent overall. I mean, as far as top 6 performances, he finished there 4 times. That tied him for WR5. As far as clocking in as a WR1, top 12, he did that 6 times, tied him for WR8. And overall, his average weekly ranking, he was WR13. So, again, when you look at where he's going in drafts, there's some value there. And to your point, Jay, when you're looking at guys you want to take, especially early, when you focus on what they're going to do early in the season, both these guys certainly have value at where they're going in drafts when you look at their counterparts.
It's draft season. It's all about maximizing every single selection. So you want to get max value out of every single pick. And right now, Adam Thielen and Stephon Diggs are presenting you with value. And we talked about weather and scheduling. Let's just all agree, though, that when we get to the end of the season, we're not trading a bunch of NFC North players for Miami Dolphins players just because it's sunny in South Florida.
No. It's still all relative. You got to have that top end talent. Moving on, we've got a new team and a new wide receiver in this division. Detroit Lions third-year wide receiver Kenny Golladay. He's currently going as wide receiver 19 in the middle of the fourth round behind Brandon Cooks and Robert Woods and in front of Calvin Ridley and Chris Godwin. He's Foresight's aggregate projected wide receiver 21, and he's total Foresight's wide receiver 23 overall. He's got a 19th middle of the road savage strength of schedule ranking at the position. He improved upon his wide receiver 69 rookie finish to wide receiver 21 overall last season in just 15 games, and he was wide receiver 25 in points per game. He had 119 targets, 70 receptions, over 1,000 yards, 15.2 yards per reception, tied for wide receiver 31 with 5 touchdowns. I mean, this was just his second year in his third season being the guy across from Marvin Jones. I know they're not going to pass a lot, but I think this guy definitely has high-end wide receiver 2 upside this year. So wide receiver 19 is a price that doesn't bother me. I would like to see it come down a little bit more to that wide receiver 23 overall, but I like Kenny Golladay this year.
See, and I completely agree with you, Ben. Wide receiver 23 seems like a very appropriate price. We all expect him to take a step forward, but unlike Thielen and Diggs, who we've seen actually do it and are going behind what they've actually done, Kenny Golladay is being drafted on expectation. His best finish so far in his 2 years is wide receiver 21, and he's going wide receiver 19. We expect him to take another step forward this season in his maturity. Now, last season, he had 37% of his team's targeted air yards, and he put up WR21 numbers. That seems like a safe level of volume for him, but again, what can he do with it? We expect that offense to improve. It certainly can't get much worse than what we saw last year, so I would think that would improve. But again, he had 37% of his targeted area of his team's targeted air yards and turned that into WR21 overall points.
And before we get into the consistency metrics, we've already touched on last episode Matt Stafford and how we expect him to come back to more of his career average and improve upon his personal performance last year, and that's certainly going to impact Kenny Golladay in a positive way.
Right. Yeah, it's a good point, Ben. And yeah, from a consistency standpoint, guys, Golladay, he didn't have a single week where he finished in the top 6. I would say his probably most shining metric I can give you from a consistency standpoint would be that he had 4 finishes as a WR1. So a top 12 guy, he did that 4 times, which tied him overall as WR13. So certainly solid. And when it comes to Golladay, and Ben, you mentioned it, like there probably will be a scaling down of the passing attack. They did bring in former offensive coordinator of the Seahawks, Darrell Bevel, who is a run-first kind of a guy, which does fit what they're doing currently in Detroit and what they want to do. So with Marvin Jones coming back healthy, I kind of feel like it's not that the talent's not there for Golladay, but like you said, Jay, I feel like he's being drafted almost at his ceiling right now. Like, I don't see him improving upon his stats last year. He got a lot of time without Marvin Jones there, which probably helped him last season. So even if he takes a step forward, having a healthy Marvin Jones there. Oh, and they also brought in Danny Amendola, which, hey, let's think about how much Matt Stafford loved Golden Tate in the slot. So let's not forget about that too. So it's just one of those things where it's not that I don't like the talent. I just think the upside is a little lacking there.
We are just waiting for Babytron to become Megatron and waiting for that breakout season, but you just have to factor in a little bit of the risk until it actually happens.
Yeah, and really just at his price tag right now, it's just going to be a wait and see when he's going behind tried and true guys like Brandon Cooks and Robert Woods. So if he slides a little bit more for me, I'm good with it. But right now, 408 is just probably a little bit higher than what I'm taking, Kenny G. So moving on to another wide receiving core in this division, you have got Chicago Bears wide receiver A-Rob Allen Robinson. He is currently going as wide receiver 31 at the top of the 7th round behind Dante Pettis, Robbie Anderson, in front of Christian Kirk and Sammy Watkins. I'm not sure Allen Robinson belongs in that group. He is Foresight's aggregate projected wide receiver 32, and he's total Foresight's wide receiver 38 overall with a 21st ranked savage strength of schedule at the position. And, he was coming off an injury last season, entering a new offense. He was wide receiver 40 overall in 13 games, wide receiver 33 in points per game. I just expect this offense to take another step. He's another year removed from that injury, and he is still only going to be 26 years old by the time the season starts. So this is a guy that, again, amongst the 4 that I just mentioned, I have zero problem at that point taking a shot on A-Rob.
Love the price for the former unicorn. I hope he he can get back to that level. But yeah, like you said, Ben, he's being a little bit undervalued in a group where his talent level probably exceeds the guys going around him. In this offense, it's a little bit of a question mark. So
right there with you guys. It's funny. I'm one of those people throughout the offseason. I haven't been high on Allen Robinson to where, I'm just like, but then when you start looking at the names he's being drafted around and their situations, Allen Robinson, he is the guy.
Right,
he is the top dog. He will get the most targets in that offense. And it's just another reason why I love Mitchell Trubisky's value. It's just another weapon for him. And yeah, guys, where he is going, kind of like it. Maybe a little peek into some of my thought process in our league of record.
Certainly appreciate those insights. Moving on to a guy that we seem to hear a lot about, Green Bay Packers wide receiver Geronimo Allison. He's currently going as wide receiver 37 behind Sterling Shepard and Larry Fitzgerald in the middle of the 8th round and in front of Marvin Jones and Corey Davis. He's the aggregate projected wide receiver 52. He has total foresights, wide receiver 71 overall. He's got a lot of sample size and durability issues over the course of his 3 years in the NFL. So he only played 5 games last season. He was wide receiver bad, wide receiver 31 in points per game, 30 targets, 20 receptions, 303 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Everybody has made it clear that he is assuming the Randall Cobb slot receiver role in that offense. And, he's definitely the slot guy, and he's now the new Randall Cobb, durability concerns and all.
He is. And, we always bring it back to price, and going where he's going in drafts around Larry Fitzgerald, Larry Legend, and in front of Corey Davis, who is the guy on his team and has a very safe volume. I just don't know if I can take Geronimo Allison, a guy who only appeared in 5 games last season, and be able to rely on him when I can have proven commodities with safe floors going right around him in drafts.
Yeah, it's almost one of those situations where you have to feel really good about your other receivers on your roster to where you're like, okay, I'll take a swing at like the possible Randall Cobb-esque prime upside. But otherwise, you're totally right, Jay. I look at some of those other names and their situations, and it's just like, I can't pass on the volume that we're going to see Fitz get or Davis get or even Marvin Jones if he's healthy for the possibility of a guy possibly playing more than 5 games this year.
Right. Exactly.
And we'll get to an even more attractive, in my opinion, option in that wide receiving core for the Packers in just a second. But first up, we've got Detroit Lions wide receiver Marvin Jones, who is going right behind Geronimo Allison as wide receiver 38 in the back end of the 8th round and going in front of Corey Davis and Dede Westbrook. He is the aggregate projected wide receiver 30, and he is total foresights wide receiver 42 overall. That's accounting for him missing about half the season last year with injury. When he is healthy, he is a guy that can be a very solid high-end wide receiver 3, back-end wide receiver 2. In 9 games last year, he turned in 35 receptions off of 62 targets, not a very good catch rate, 508 yards, 14.5 yards per reception, and 5 touchdowns. With Golden Tate out of there, him and Kenny G are the 1 and 2 for sure. Yeah. So at that point in your draft, I don't have a problem with you taking a shot at Marvin Jones whatsoever. I personally like Larry Fitzgerald and Corey Davis a little bit more because of the points you previously made when we were comparing them to Geronimo Allison. But Marvin Jones is a fine value where he's going right now, I think.
Absolutely. And we talked about it many times so far in these last 2 podcasts, that Detroit Lions offense, you trade Golden Tate, you lose Marvin Jones to injury, and boy, what an anemic offense and how in flux was it. However, when Marvin Jones was on the field, he had 15% of his team's targeted air yards, which I think can increase. So I think that number can go up and he can have a larger target share in the 2019 season, which does give him some upside appeal. He has typically been durable, although we didn't see that last season. But heading into 2019, I'm with you, Ben. He and Kenny should be able to return a positive value. Now, in his career, he's finished in as WR29, WR35, 43, 11 before being injured and finishing in as WR63 last year. So we've seen him finish a season as high as WR11, although he typically finishes in around WR30. Both of those numbers are better than his WR38 price tag.
Yeah, absolutely, guys. I mean, going at the bottom of the 8th round, I mean, this is a guy that you should feel extremely comfortable having as your WR3, and he has WR2, potentially low-end WR1 upside. So when you look at that whole situation, I mean, I think it definitely presents some nice value there.
We talk about safe volumes. This is a guy whose volume could actually increase.
Definitely. And it's just so funny how these episodes work sometimes, because sometimes we get to the end and we're talking about super boring guys. When you look at Marvin Jones and these last two receivers we got, that is not the case at all today.
Yeah.
Other than Devontae Adams, the pass catcher that I am maybe most excited about in Green Bay this year is wide receiver Marquez Valdez-Scantling, who we will further refer to as MVS, okay?
Thank you.
Yeah, wide receiver 41 is his current ADP in the middle of the 9th round, behind Corey Davis and Dede Westbrook, in front of Cortland Sutton and N'Keal Harry. He was wide receiver 72 as far as our aggregate projection goes, and wide receiver 73 in our total foresight rank, with limited usage last season in his rookie campaign. He has got a top 12 savage strength of schedule metric at the wide receiver position. You'll love seeing the fact that he played all 16 games last season. And here's what, in his rookie season, he earned enough from Aaron Rodgers to get 73 targets. Now, he was only able to convert 38 of those into receptions, but he converted that into 581 yards at a 15.3 yard per reception clip. He had 2 touchdowns. Definitely a lot of chatter about how much A-Rod loves this guy. And at this price, if you want to take a share and a shot at the pass game for Aaron Rodgers' wide receiving core, I think this is a great place to do it.
Ben, there is some tremendous upside now. We've discussed how difficult it is for a rookie to come into the NFL and have an immediate fantasy impact. MVS is now entering his sophomore year. He's got 16 healthy games under his belt. In next-gen stats, his average separation was good enough for wide receiver, running back, or tight end 23 overall. In addition to that, what I love is his yards after catch per reception. His breakaway was good enough for wide receiver, running back, or tight end 17 overall. This guy can be a playmaker. That is something this Packers offense desperately needs. They need something to complement Devontae Adams, and it may be it in MVS. You are right, Ben. There is some upside here that you can get in the middle of the 9th round at WR41.
Yeah, guys, I'll skip Geronimo Allison all day long, wait an extra round, and pick up MVS. And there's been a lot of talk about, well, you know, Allison was so good those first few games playing in that WR2 on the outside. Why are they putting him in the slot? And it's like, have you seen MVS on the outside? This guy can run.
Yes.
I watched a lot of Packers games last year, a lot of Aaron Rodgers. These guys were like, so close to hooking up on like a handful of really long bombs, where I feel like with Aaron Rodgers' knee being healthy, a second year working together, we will see some monster plays out of these two guys. And the middle of the 9th round, sign me up all day long. I can see 1,000-yard season for this guy.
Based on what you just said, Steve, I definitely can see his catch rate going up.
Good point.
And then on top of that, his volume is going up. He is not going to just have 73 targets. That's A-Rod is wide receiver 2 over 16 games. That number is going well north of 100, and that catch rate's going to improve. So the upside in the 9th round on MVS is immense and potentially league winning.
Are we officially stamping this? We've been doing all these preview podcasts. Are we stamping this as a foresight breakout candidate?
Absolutely.
I think we have to, guys.
Love it. All right, let's move on to our final wide receiver that we will be covering in this episode, and that is Anthony Miller from the Chicago Bears, currently being drafted as WR53 late in the 11th round, behind Dante Moncrief and Paris Campbell, going in front of Devin Funchess and Mecole Hardman. His aggregate projection is WR63. We have him ranked as WR78 in total foresight, and he has the 21st Savage Strength of Schedule ranking. Last year, his rookie campaign, he came in as WR60. He had 4 starts out of 15 games. He put up 33 catches on 54 targets for 423 yards, 7 touchdowns, and a 12.8 yards per reception clip. His next-gen stats don't really jump off the page at you. There's nothing really notable there. Reports of his competitiveness and toughness are off the charts out of the locker room this offseason, and this year he's claiming to be fully healthy And at that price, that is certainly some potential in that offense.
Yeah, I mean, I really like the upside of Anthony Miller this season. Again, I really like that offense to take a step this year. And Anthony Miller is a super competitive guy who dealt with a lot of injuries last season. And I think it is a big deal that he is fully healthy. So at that price tag, I really like his value this season. Wide receiver 53 is a very slight investment for a guy who could easily return back in wide receiver 2 value.
Love it. Hey, we've done it. We've completed another great episode of the Fantasy Foresight podcast. We had our first breakout star officially stamped by this podcast with Marquez Valdez-Scantling of the Green Bay Packers. I hope we all learned a little something. And to wrap up, don't forget, here are our reminders. We will be at the Midwest Fantasy Football Expo Sunday, August 18th from noon to 6 p.m. If you are in the Canton area, come out, see us. You won't want to miss it. We will be giving away the final spot in the Fantasy Foresight Challenge, our competition in 2019, where you can take on 6 members of the Fantasy Foresight squad in a 12-team PPR season-long league. If you think you have what it takes to take us down at our game in our home, the winner of the league will win $1,000. Good luck to you. All it takes is a small donation to the Special Olympics. We are always in favor of supporting charity whenever we can here at Fantasy Foresight. So go to our Twitter page, click there for all the details. Soon we will be announcing our draft time and all of the details, so watch for that. And don't forget to check out the new Fantasy Foresight online store. Promo codes always available for discounts. Hit us up on Twitter. We'll make sure we get you a nice little discount to get you outfitted in some wonderful Fantasy Foresight merchandise.
Next up on this podcast, we will be back with you to discuss the quarterbacks and the running backs of the AFC South. Can't wait.
And that wraps up this episode of Fantasy Foresight, the podcast. We thank you for joining us. Be sure to visit us, as always, at fantasyforesight.com. Use the links at the bottom of the page to find us across social media, including Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and wherever you pod. We hope you enjoyed the episode, and we'll see you next time.